Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another, and I can't believe I'm saying this, another Lazerpig reaction. But yes, the myth of Wittmann. Do you mean Michael Wittmann, the World War II tank ace? Well, it appears that Lazerpig has bestowed upon us a World War II video. Ooh. I know it's a bit more than hyperbole, but when I say that I was jonesing for some new Lazerpig stuff, I was really needing it. I'm not complaining, I'm just happy that we have something new. And yeah, so with the original video being 52 minutes and 19 seconds long, my reaction is most likely gonna be, close to an hour. I'm gonna be cutting this in half, just so it's easier to watch. So yeah, with all that out of the way, original video is in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will be leading to my Let's Play of the day, whatever that's going to be. And yeah, let's get into this then, shall we?
So when I was younger and I was taking my first baby steps into the world of history, I always imagined myself visiting museums and old dusty archives, rustling through piles of ancient documents and squelching through fields with a metal detector. I was perhaps even young and
going
naive
Indiana
enough to imagine
Jones.
that maybe one day I'll get a job working for an archive, or perhaps I'll oversee a collection in a museum, or maybe I'll dive headfirst so far down the history knowledge hole I shall ascend to that greatest of all historian positions, being a guest star on Channel 4's Time Team.
Time Team, a British TV shows in which a group of archaeologists would carry out an archaeological dig over a period of 3 days. So it's an archaeology reality show? 21 years.
I dreamed.
No, wait, no one has yet been able to explain why it was ever popular.
I dreamed of the days I would host my own historical documentaries, write
I
my
mean,
own
he
books,
has.
and give lectures in universities. I never would have imagined that I would spend most of my
Mr.
life from
Bean.
that point on, sitting with my face buried in my hands, while yet another tea-drinking beardy man in a cardigan tells me the fascinating story of how the Russians strapped landmines to dogs, and how ironic it was that the dogs immediately turned round and blew up the Russian tanks. Oh, how I laughed the first 40-odd times.
Yeah, I heard that one a number of
My
times.
character, I must admit. I became somewhat loathing of my friends every time they would mention to someone that I was into history, and I would look over with that mixture of fear, loathing, and pure hatred. And sure enough, there was that casual nod, and then that slow smile spread across that stupid face as they began their assault on my mental health. Well, did you know? And once again, I had to listen as they continued to drone on about their batshit theory that if the Germans had won, we'd have none of this woke shit. We'd have colonized Mars and have laser guns by now. You politely restrain yourself as they comment how the Allies had won just by sheer weight of numbers, and if only the Germans had built more Panther tanks, then you and I would be speaking German by now. Of course, I've always proclaimed one can never truly call yourself a historian unless you develop a serious eye twitch anytime one of these fuckers opens their mouth, and you become almost filled with this blind rage and the voices of 1,000 of your ancestors chant in unison, egging you on to jam a history book down the fucker's mouth, screaming your fiercest battle cry so that maybe, just maybe, he might actually learn something.
I mean, I will entirely say there was a time when I believed such a thing, but I grew up. I now know that we wouldn't have Wolfenstein if the, the Nazis actually won.
Some say that is excessive in terms of force. I say you haven't lived until you've taken down at least one of these idiots at a wine tasting party with a hardback copy of Defeating the Panzerstücke Menace by David Lister. Other books are available. I did
look
at
that
one
one
point start writing my own history book. Unfortunately, no publisher would ever take me seriously when I insisted that the entire thing be printed on fuzzy felt to appeal to the general audience. Ranting again, and I don't apologize for it. Veribus. You've seen them. They're always sneaking around in web forums and discussion blogs, historical discussion tabs and discords, or the side chat of World War II games. Wherever history is being discussed, a Werribee will be found, scuttling around under rocks and into the dark places.
Like all of the little wigglety-nigglety creepy crawlies that they are.
Amateur historians who have seen a few documentaries, read a few books, and think they've come to some pretty exciting conclusions. Actually, you know what? No, sir, I disagree. That is not a Werribee. I don't care what you've been told. A man who thinks Nazi Germany was the greatest military force in the world is not a Wehraboo.
That's a Nazi.
A common idiot. The sheer magnitude of
books and films
and documentaries released over the past 60 years, which have proclaimed this invincible Nazi empire as a fact, has been overwhelming. The idea of the revolutionary, incredible, and oh so invincible Nazi war machine, stopped only by sheer numbers of inferior tanks, is what I'd expect any common idiot on the street to tell me. Let's call him John. No, sir. Wehraboo is typically someone who has not fallen in love with history. They care not for any crumb of historical knowledge outside of that one specialist subject of German Second World War stuff. And they write endless pages of comments justifying their belief in the Nazi war machine and how it laid the foundations of modern warfare. Dare I say, we even use blitzkrieg as a battle tactic today, they might proclaim.
Wehraboo we don't really.
You could stand the stench on their breath, that they are not a Nazi. No, sir. They don't believe in the politics. They just think Nazi stuff was the best and looks the coolest. Essentially, they've fallen in love with the aesthetic. And the biggest part of that aesthetic is the idea of the refined officer class. Big offices, fabulously decorated homes, and an air of professionalism and pride, discussing war tactics over a glass of wine or a fine whiskey, dressed in the most immaculate of uniforms, conducting themselves as refined gentlemen should. Now you and I, we both know this is all complete bullshit. These were not refined gentlemen. These were drug-addled psychopaths who had all the class and sophistication of a crack house.
Wait a second, this video is supposed to be about Michael Wittmann, isn't it?
Who would fall into childish petty squabbles at the drop of a hat. The idea of the refined German officer was a myth created by Nazi propaganda and enhanced in the 50s to try and get the new member NATO states used to the idea of working with their former enemy Germany. Look at this refined, honourable gentleman who did his duty and fought fiercely, and if Germany have a few more of those, then the Russians don't stand a chance. And into this myth comes a wave of published memoirs documenting their side of the story, blaming Hitler for everything and proclaiming loudly that if they just had everything they needed, and more importantly had everyone else in this context being the dead ones, not spent their time squabbling over prestige tokens.
It's like, if I just had everything I needed, I would have won. I mean, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that logic works for anything, really.
That Germany would have won. But, you know, probably also because they were angling for jobs as advisors to NATO, who were probably very interested in speaking to anyone who had experience fighting the Russians. Now, Crown Prince of this has always been Mr. Heinz I Invented Everything Guderian, who wrote in his book, which has been revised numerous times by various people to include yet more great feats of military strategy, that he single-handedly invented the idea of combined arms warfare. Though I must also give credit to Rommel, who got a head start by writing his book mid-war, and then having everyone else publish a fairy tale version of it, translated into every language possible after his death.
He started writing in the middle of war, okay.
Dashing clashes of armor duels in the opening months of France and Africa, forgetting that he was so petty when he received an order he didn't agree with, or from someone he didn't like, he would switch off his radio set and ignore it, only turning it back on when he'd outrun his own supply lines and needed to beg for fuel, which he did consistently. Far from being the military genius, he was a one-trick pony that relied on British incompetence in the desert, which he routinely failed to take advantage of, driving his entire forces into pointless charges to cover as much ground as possible until they ran out of fuel and became easy prey for dug-in Allied defenses. Once the Brits got their shit sorted out, Rommel lost every single battle. But of course, his memoirs would just blame that on the silly Italians. He was not to blame. He was a military genius. Oh, yes, he was. But our story does not concern these boys. Our story centers on another one who thankfully did not get to write his own memoirs, though he did write his own legacy. He is one of the most talked about tank commanders in history. No one could even mention German World War II tanks without bringing him up, and even the History Channel made this wonderfully funny documentary where they proclaimed that if he were alive today, he would still be one of the greatest who ever lived. His story has spawned countless—
Wait, who said that? What?
Legends, books, stories, inspired films, and a generation of man-babies parading up and down their house in SS uniforms, pretending they are him. Yes, today we are talking about that bastard, Michael Wittmann. But first, who is Wittmann, and why is he so famous? Wittmann was a tank commander, often cited as a tank ace, the Black Baron or the ace among aces by post-war sensationalist news articles and books.
Yeah.
He was the son of a farmer who rose quickly through the ranks, first as a guard in the Lebensstandard, and then for the LSSPH as a driver and then commander of an armoured car during the Polish campaign. His daring, patience, and charming attitude made him quite favoured among his commanders. Also, he was Bavarian, which kind of does help. And he quickly found himself being retrained as the commander to a squad of Stug 3 assault guns. Wittmann would serve with honours, operating first in Yugoslavia and then in Greece before finally being shipped out to the Eastern Front, where his actions with the Stug destroyed a number of T-34s and earned him the Iron Cross Second Class. His reward for bravery was to command the Russian tankers who had survived their encounter with him be given the very best of medical care, thus earning him a reputation as a gentleman and a man of honour. His success would continue through 1942 and 1943. He would earn even more awards in this time: the Knight's Cross, the Iron Cross First Class, the Tank Assault Badge in silver, and the Wound Badge in black. Several promotions later, and he was finally selected for officer training. He promptly then won several more awards, including the Royal Bulgarian Soldier's Cross of the Order of Bravery Second Class in August, and later in the same month he was decorated with the Eastern Front Medal. But it would be here that Wittmann would be retrained, not as an assault gun commander, but as a tank commander. And the tank he would be given command of would be the mighty Panzer VI. The Tiger.
I was a bit early on that, sorry.
Of a Panzer III, but so little of that time has been recorded and it's not really that interesting. He would take part in the famed Battle of Kursk and end his career on the Eastern Front having scored a near total of 90 kills, never having lost a tank under his command. He would be awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross and later the Oak Leaves to the Iron Cross upon receiving a personal telegram from Hitler himself.
Okay, granted, I'm not the most well-versed when it comes to World War II German, like, army commendations, but Knight's Cross to the Iron Cross? So it was a cross, 2 added to the cross, and then there was the thing added. Okay, I'm going to have to look that up afterwards to figure out what he's talking about, what that even looks like.
Now, if you haven't already guessed by the title of this video, a lot of what I've just told you might sound a little bit suspicious. In fact, it feels like I'm almost reading from fan fiction, which is good. It means your skeptical senses are working today. And boy, are you going to need them. Because now we get to the most famous battle of Wittmann's career, the Battle of Villers-Bocage. It's June 1944, D-Day has begun, and the combined arms of the United States, Canada and Britain, as well as the not-to-be-understated amount from France, Poland and India, have arrived in a 50-mile stretch of beach in Normandy. And the mighty German Reich, having spent the first half of the war laughing at France and its...
I mean, yeah, it makes sense, but for some reason it never occurred to me that India had, like, troops that landed on that beach as well.
line of static defenses, while proclaiming loudly that in this new age of mobile armored warfare, static defenses are useless, and decided the best defense against these landings was a series of static defenses. This goes about as well as expected. Though far from a cakewalk, the landings are successful. Allied forces establish a beachhead, and around 130,000 troops now push inland. And the British sector, the city of Caen, which was originally penned as a day one objective, is proving a somewhat difficult nut to crack. Caen has vital airfields as well as rail and road links. Taking it is a priority, as if the Germans can hold it, they can more easily reinforce units which are currently fighting in the American sector. Now, the Brits and Canadians have a tough time with this because, as every British historian with an axe to grind after suffering from years of it being forgotten that Britain even did anything during World War II will happily point out, the vast majority of Germany's elite troops and panzer divisions were pointed at them. Not that the Americans were having a particularly easy time regardless. They had Patton leading them, which, at this point should have really just been considered an act of sabotage.
Yeah.
Now, in order to try and surround the besieged city of Caen, the Brits attempt a flanking maneuver, which will take them through the town of Villers-Bocage, and it's here they come face to face with the one and only Michael Wittmann.
I am loving this so far.
And as the sun beat down upon this company, it glazed the silken dark Bavarian skin of the true man, one Michael Wittmann. He flexed his perfectly toned muscles and laughed his beautiful laugh. his hair flowing majestically in the wind. Gosh, you're so cool, said the other tankers, and pinned yet another medal to his bare chest. But he just laughed off the pain because he was cool like that. But alas, the evil British Empire and their backwards monarchy society had come to ruin the day. We're going to bomb the old folks' home in Dresden, they said with their twisted evil smiles. But Wittmann would not allow such a thing, so he leapt from his chair and single-handedly destroyed 20 tanks before flying back across the border to safety. And the angels did cheer. No, wait, that's what the Wereboos think happened. Okay, essentially, if you're not aware, Michael Wittmann is the commander of a Tiger tank, and during one of the many battles in France that took place after D-Day, he allegedly fought the vanguard of the British 7th Armoured Brigade, the famed Desert Rats, single-handed, destroying over 20 tanks completely by himself in a village called Villers-Bocage. Now, as you may have guessed from the tone of this video, that's not actually what happened. What actually happened is going to be a little bit confusing, at least at first. Now you see, we do have a lot of sources about this battle. The British would publish 2 reports in it, the Germans 3. Whitman was even interviewed for radio, and some of the British tankers involved were interviewed by the British newspapers, who compiled it all together into a story. The problem is, all of these sources greatly disagree with each other over what happened. Now, if you're a typical historian who's used to working with primary sources, that will not be of any great shock to you. This happens a lot in history. It's why I laugh at people when they tell me that being a historian is all about shuffling through dusty old archives and looking at primary sources. It's not. That's about a third of it. But a huge problem with a lot, not all, but a lot of historians is they tend to get born into academia. They get used to the library and the classroom and think that's all there is, or think that's the single most important part. It's not. There's actually this thing called the historian's triangle of academia, practical, and reenactment. Once you've done all 3, then you've probably got a better understanding of what went down. But as you might expect, a lot of people in academia don't really value reenactors so much. And a lot of reenactors get really pissed off at snotty academics telling them that they're wrong. It's why I've always said if you want to be a historian, don't study history, study people. History will teach you dates and events, and if you're on a really good course, how to look up things in an archive and label your sources correctly. Studying people will give you a better perspective on how the human mind works and how people think, and that's important because academia often makes the mistake that a primary source overwrites everything else.
Just as an aside, I always love seeing like super old footage like this. It's just... I like seeing people in the past like this.
Doesn't handle particularly well the idea that it was a human who wrote that primary source. Humans who notoriously get things wrong, who lie, who exaggerate, or think they saw something when they didn't, or remember something very clearly that didn't happen. But you try telling a professor that the sources he cites might be wrong because they were written by humans, and watch him swell up like a balloon. In our case, every single report on the Battle of Villers-Bocage is wrong. Whitman's original report was edited by Nazi propagandists to put Whitman center stage and make him sound a lot more heroic. The radio interview was by Signal, a Nazi propaganda magazine whose sole purpose was to make everything Nazi Germany sound amazing and brilliant. It's available online and is often used by a source by idiots who have yet to realize that Nazi Germany lied. Quite a lot.
Shock! It's almost like governments want to make themselves look good.
Mobius, Whitman's second, lied because he wanted to make himself sound more heroic, and he was tired of constantly playing second fiddle to Whitman. The Panzerlehr lied because they weren't there. They arrived much later, and Kurt Meyer, who was its commander at the time, famously hated Whitman. But he would go on to survive the war, and become one of the most prolific Nazi apologists of the 1950s, who would write books and give grand speeches in which he debunked what he claimed were the myths of Nazi war crimes and greatly over-exaggerated the might and power of the SS as a fighting unit. He now resides in his grave with a tombstone clearly inspired by Flash Gordon. The British, on the other hand, well, the British are notoriously bad at writing reports. They hate doing it, and they typically want to get it over and done with as quickly as possible. None of the commanders who wrote reports actually witnessed the event, and British newspapers are not exactly known for their reliability and hard-hitting journalism, especially during the 1940s. Especially when you realize the newspaper who wrote the report was the Daily Mail. The other problem, of course, is if you go...
Wait, really? Oh, wow, okay. That shines all of that in a very new light.
Into this, you will be balls deep in about 500 other historians, all milling around doing essentially nothing, all trying to be new and exciting without actually doing anything helpful. I'll give you an example.
Oh no.
The YouTube channel World War II TV, now this is a fairly decent channel, I do like it, did a video with Daniel Taylor back in 2020. Now Taylor is the curator of the Kent and Sharpshooters Museum. Sharpshooters in the Queen's Own were the groups present at Villers-Bocage. So out of everyone, I believe this man has the most knowledge on the subject matter, and it would have been brilliant to actually hear what he had to say on it. The video by World War II TV, however, is a bit of a fever dream. They're doing it on the anniversary of the battle, and rather than just produce a video, they instead opt for a live stream, where in the middle of COVID, they have a bunch of people roaming around Villers-Bocage with cameras. They seem to believe that this would be some sort of epic, never-done-before spectacle, but in reality, they spend much of their time talking into dead air while they wait for a cameraman to get into position. They interrupt Taylor several times mid-story because one of their cameramen is now finally standing on the road where all this happened, and then you get this grainy image of a road in France because their bandwidth is terrible and they're trying to do it over Zoom. They are plagued with technical issues. They even have the slideshow of images that isn't well prepared, and Taylor half the time just ends up holding a picture up to the camera. There's a reason this channel only has 46,000 subscribers. There is a wealth of good information here, but it is presented so jarringly, it is a difficult video to watch.
I mean, granted, I'm not one to talk. I have, at this point, 1,200 subscribers in total. A vast majority of them, I assume, have subscribed to me for my reaction content, not so much my gaming content. But at the same time, something like that, if I was trying to make something for an anniversary of something so important, granted, I don't know what his budget is, or to see if he could have, like, maybe paid up or paid the guys who had the cameras, like, for, like, a better bandwidth for, like, the month or something. But that whole thing was just, ugh, I felt myself cringing inwardly.
Would have been far better had they just let Taylor speak and had little tokens moving around a map with references to the photos and where they were taken, and maybe some overviews on Google Maps to give a clearer picture of where everything was, rather than watching a guy get stuck in traffic for 20 minutes while he drives to the road, the actual road where the battle took place. Now, the actual road is no longer there, but as you can see where the hedgerows would have been if they were still there, it just didn't work.
Oh.
Taylor is a very knowledgeable person. It would have been far better had everyone else just shut up and let him speak for an hour. But they had to advertise this as a fresh, new, exciting, never-done-before experience, and this is the main problem with the Battle of Villers-Bocage. This is quite potentially the most overstudied battle in history. And the problem is not a lack of information, but the sheer overwhelming amount of it. And most of it, which is contradictory or biased in nature, takes too much from one source, or takes Nazi propaganda as verbatim, or just repeats the same bullshit over and over and over. Now, the absolute worst I could do here is wade asshole first into the shitstorm, make up yet more shit, and then proclaim that my shit is better because it has come out of my ass. So I'm not going to. Instead, I'm just going to assume that Taylor's version of the timeline is correct and go through it, dispelling any myths along the way. Now, I know many of you will have heard a different version of this battle that you absolutely 100% know is the right version and may think I have gotten everything wrong, and how dare I? I'm going to write a comment that'll show the pig. But frankly, Taylor has done more research than I have on this subject.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. The whole thing that happened when I did his reaction to where Lazerpig was talking about how, I don't want to use the word comical, but, you know, the whole development history of the T-14 Armada. And granted, he has come out and said that he got information wrong in that video. One of them being, you know, when he was talking about the engine strength of the tank. He came out and said that he was not aware that the Russians measured, like, engine strength differently. They use a different calculation for, like, horsepower or something. It's just, for real though, it's been a while since I listened to his explanation of like the differences in how Russia and the rest of the world calculates this stuff, and it's just I can't remember it at the moment. I'm very sorry.
More importantly, done more research than you have. So if you think I'm wrong, I'll be sure to pass your comments along. Firstly, I think it's important to understand why the British were at Villers-Bocage, and why they seem so complacent. They're sitting down to tea, they're not really prepared to fight anything, they're just doing maintenance. And the reason why they're doing this is kind of glossed over. It's typically put down as British stupidity that they would be halfway through a major assault and then stop to have tea. Which did happen. I'll be the first to admit that. The common British soldier was heavily unionized, so they demanded regular tea breaks. There's
Unionized?
a story in Italy where a bunch of American paratroopers get lost in the dark and find a squad of Brits probing the front lines, so they link up with them and the Brits pause to have a tea break, much to the disbelief of the Americans. But this wasn't that. What was actually happening was panic. On the German side, a series of very aggressive and very successful assaults across the American line had opened up a hole in the German defences directly between the British and American sectors. Sensing they had very little time to act, the Brits then pushed into this gap. Their objective is a big hill called Point 213. If the Brits can control this, they can easily see the movements of anyone surrounding Caen, and more importantly, direct artillery onto anyone surrounding Caen. Now,
It always comes down to artillery, doesn't it? Whether it's rocket or just big old guns. Whoever has the bigger guns wins.
to get to that point, the Brits will have to push through this village, Villers-Bocage. Now, when they get there, French civilians are celebrating. There had been a German command post and a field hospital there, but those had been abandoned. The few German soldiers left surrendered without a fight. The French were adamant the Germans had fully retreated from the area and that German tanks were in a different town several miles away. Now, it would be wrong to think that the Brits had not been doing their own recon. A lot of British commanders at the time were worried that not enough reconnaissance was being done, so this kind of gets picked up on quite a lot. They actually were. The problem was twofold. Firstly, it was the speed of the advance. It had to be fast. The Brits were hoping their advance would go undetected, but sporadic sniper fire, a Panzerschreck ambush which lost them a Sherman, and a few encounters with armoured cars proved that the Germans indeed knew exactly where they were, and could probably guess where they were going. So they had to, in the words of one famous blue hedgehog, go fast. The second problem was that they were in fact doing their own recon. They had flooded the surrounding countryside with armoured cars. But we're talking this is 1940s French countryside. And a lot of people I don't think truly understand the power of a French hedge. This is a British hedge. It's basic, it's leafy, it keeps your neighbours out of your yard, and you use it to stash Pormacs and beer because your mum won't let you have those in the house. This is a French bocage hedge.
I think hedge is the wrong word for that. I think the proper term would be plant tunnel. Jeez, they're everywhere.
Getting anything through those, especially if it's got wheels, is almost impossible. The armoured cars have to follow the roads, and all roads lead to Caen. Specifically, lead to where the Germans are trying to push into the city. There are very few roads leading south, so the Brits basically have to go in blind, following the one route they can. Now, when Wittmann begins his attack charging down this road, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he was attacking the main British advance, which had stopped for tea, because that's usually how the story starts. The dumb British sitting down for tea. Ha ha ha. It was not the main British advance. The main advance, a group of Shermans from the sharpshooters, had already advanced towards the hill and secured it. Wittmann had remained hidden as he watched them go by. Contrary to what many claim, he was not up a hill observing the British, he was in a dry riverbed, completely unaware that anything was going on, until certain officers and medical staff that were fleeing Villers-Bocage made him aware. Now, of course, Wittmann wasn't alone. He had several other Tigers under his command, and there is this big debate about which tank he was actually in. I'm going to gloss over this because I want to get back to it later. Wittmann begins his attack. He opens fire on the Sherman at the back of the column, which had the unfortunate name of Pistol Packin' Mama. That's not a Fallout reference, by the way. The tank was actually called that.
Well, I would hope it's not a Fallout reference, given that, like, all of the Fallout games came out like at the very latest in the 90s. Otherwise, there's some really weird time travel shenanigans going on there.
Pistol crackin' mama, lay that pistol down.
Wittmann then bursts through this hedge and starts machine gunning down the convoy. The tank at the head of the column, a Firefly, finds this somewhat disagreeable and manages to rotate its turret and get a shot off at Wittmann. I'll return to that bit later. Thankfully for Wittmann, Sobert is still hanging around at a different Tiger and manages to take it out. The only other vehicles here are soft skin vehicles, largely half-tracks, the American-made M3, one of which is the medical half-track, which Wittmann fills full of holes. This is what one of those would have looked like. The hood is painted bright white with a red cross in it that Wittmann would have been able to see from his elevated position. I'm making a point here, and I'll get back to it later.
Yeah, I believe that is what's classified, in layman's terms as a war crime. And that is it for part 1 of this reaction. If you want to continue on to part 2, the links to that are in the corner video in the top left, or in the link in the description. I hope you've liked so far, and if you have a good day.